And now I'd like to welcome to the stage Jennifer Kabat and Jon Key. You all come on up. Both of them, yes. Both of them are faculty members who have taught the class of 2024. Jon Key is a member of the class of 2021, I'm proud to say, in addition to being a designer, artist, and educator, and co-founder of the award-winning studio Morcos Key. His forthcoming and first book, Black, Queer, and Untold, a new archive of designers, artists, and trailblazers, will be published this fall by Levine Corrido. And Jon teaches a section of our Approaches to Design History class. Jennifer Kabat is a writer whose first book, The Eighth Moon, was released last week. Yes, yes. And her second book, Night Shining, will be published in 2025. Both books are published by Milkweed Editions. Jennifer's byline has appeared in Freeze, McSweeney's Bomb, the New York Review of Books, the Los Angeles Review of Books, The Believer, just to name a few. And her writing has been included in the collected volume of Best American Essays. Jennifer teaches our Research Writing 1 and 2 courses, also known respectively as From Description to the Short News Feature and the Long Review and Essay. So Jennifer and Jon are going to spend the next 15 minutes or so talking about the role of archival research in their work and how the past can illuminate the present. I will turn it over to you two.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Is this working? Yes.
Thank you for having me and Jon as your amuse-bouche for the evening. Congratulations, everybody. We're very excited to see your presentation.
Yes.
So we haven't rehearsed this. We don't have notes. This is super informal, and Brooke is going to wave her hands at us if we start talking too much, because Jon and I could go on for an hour.
Forever.
At least. Forever. And we thought we would first each tell you a little bit about our books, because they're both basically using archives as ways to ground ourselves in the present. So the short premise of my book is a woman moves to the Catskills, joins her fire department, discovers an 1845 socialist uprising, and time travels back to the past. No, that's a little bit, that's not quite it. Basically, my book is based on trying to understand the place I live and the values in that place. And in learning about this socialist uprising in the 1840s in my town as a way to understand the community I'm in, but also a way to understand that community in this moment of kind of Trumpism. And it involved a lot of archival research, which we're going to talk about. But in my town and in my fire department, most of the people I serve with, their forebearers were part of that socialist uprising and are now very politically different, but that uprising looks a lot like the present tense moment too. Okay, now Jon.
So exciting. I can't wait to read it. So my book is called Black, Queer, Untold, a new archive of designers, artists, and trailblazers. I basically started this project in this program, in the D-Queer program in 2021. So it's really excited to see almost 4 years later that it's about to be birthed out into the world. But my book is about looking at graphic design ephemera. So prints, posters, lithographs, newspaper clippings, magazines, and trying to find instances of Black queer histories that have been preserved or contained within those various objects. And I think in a big way for me as a Black queer graphic designer and artist, I was looking for examples of myself in history. I was looking for examples of other designers who looked like me in history. And also, I think that was definitely in contrast to being in design lectures at RISD and not hearing anything about anyone that looked like me or seeing any objects that looked like me. And so this is really kind of it kind of has a lot of like historical, biographical, kind of hardcore facts, but it's also intertwined with my own personal narrative and my own kind of personal memories, kind of grounding how I'm navigating these spaces and these archives.
I have two things I want to say. Is like, one, I was Jon's teacher. Two, I was really floored by his research and all the ways, like, one of the things that I like about the program and where the program is right now is that a lot of people are using the archives and the research as ways to situate themselves in the world now and in the political world now. And that there's a real reason for doing research. And Jon's project, which was incredibly hard because it was also a pandemic and there were no archives to go to.
Like literally did the program on Zoom.
Yes. But also part of archival material is actually getting to touch it. And that sort of like moment that transports you.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I will say that I like about the program is that the program is this one where you might be a student one year and then the professor the next. Like the program is actually one that is really embraces the paths that the people are in it are on. And I'm going to just say one other thing is like, I am also, I'm a socialist. So I was trying to find a history where I could situate myself in the place that I live so I didn't feel so foreign. And it actually started off by finding a census record where I saw a neighbor who in 1863 named their first child Lincoln.
Oh.
And this was at a time when the Civil War was very unpopular in New York State because of the draft. And I was like, and there was a lot of violence against Black people at that point, and orphanages were burnt. And I was like, oh, maybe I can belong to this land in this other way. And that was really important. So it's like we can all go to the archives for wild self-seeding purposes. And I had this idea that Jon and I could talk. I remember this image. Do you want to jump ahead to Jon's lithograph for a second? Go one ahead. So in our class, Jon was writing about this image of a trans woman. And I also have a lithograph that's about 9 years later, that's sort of the centerpiece of my book. And I thought, oh, we have these lithographs in common. Let's talk about them.
Let's talk about them.
So yeah, tell people
bit.
about your man monster who is not a monster at all.
Exactly. So Mary Jones is, again, I hate using the word first because it's kind of a ridiculous thing to say, but I would say like maybe the first reported, in quotes, or documented Black trans woman in New York. And I found the story about Mary Jones by literally Googling in old newspaper archives the word gay. And I was like, because I think one of my professors was like, when is the first time gay was found used in a newspaper? And I was like, huh. And so I Googled this. I was researching all these film strips of, newspaper clippings. And I found this phrase, gay deceiver. And so when this was written in 1835, gay at that moment meant sex worker oftentimes. It went from being happy to sex worker to being, homosexual like we know now. So I was like, what does it mean, a deceiving sex worker? And then this name came up, Peter Sawali and Mary Jones. And then as I continued to research and dig and find out about this person, this lithograph came up. And this lithograph was made in 1836 by H.R. Robinson, and they titled it The Man Monster. So you can imagine why they did that. They have this, this Black trans woman that's been written up in newspapers that were stealing money from, people, was a sex worker, and was kind of a celebrity also. And was, talked about how beautiful she was in the newspapers, but also talked about how she was evil and was in disguise. And so I think there's something interesting about this lithograph where you have this really beautiful depiction of Mary Jones in this beautiful kind of white dress with the flowers kind of balling down. If you look at in her right hand, there's a wallet that is kind of telling you she steals wallets. But she has stolen wallets from multiple men over time. Maybe she keeps the money in this little round purse. And then you can also see how obviously the dress is so enveloping her whole body, so you can't see her shape. It's really disguising her. But then if you see how beautiful this is rendered at the top, and you see the typography where it says the man monster. So I think there is this interest, and I think it translates also into the text and the newspaper clippings of people loved her. People thought she was beautiful, but people also hated her. She confused and she aroused. She was, someone who was just trying to survive and became somehow, for some reason, the center of attention. And the last thing I would say about this lithograph is this is definitely not an accurate depiction of Mary Jones. This is probably a lithograph that they found of a fashionable white woman at that time and probably just inked her face black and also probably just added these little ingredients with the wall is kind of, again, kind of hearkening to her story. But it's a really amazing story, and this was one of the first kind of artifacts that I found in my research when I was really looking at, obviously trans people existed in the 1800s and for the whole beginning of time, but how were they actually captured or contained within these print ephemera? So
Yeah, and so back then in 2021. Jon was doing these beautiful descriptions of this woman and how she was committed to print and like the usage of that. And the other thing that I liked about Jon's project was that it didn't have to be linear, that it could be these flashpoints in time around which he could find the archives and find himself. And that the non-linearity was also important as these moments of kind of like identity flashed up.
And speaking of non-linearity, I can't say that word, linearity, I can't say that. Well, your book, right, is you said it was written in first person present and kind of excavating all of these different histories throughout time.
So yeah, my book, I call it being polytemporal. Yes, basically. So for me, particularly with socialist uprisings, we often think like the idea of progress is that time is over, and that those moments are defeated. And instead, I'm very interested in like what does it mean if instead of a chronological linear time, we could look at those beads as ones that are still accessible to us.
Yes.
Which is, here it's like, but it's also problematic because maybe you want to go back. There we go.
Yeah.
So the other thing is that I wanted to talk to Jon because basically this socialist uprising happened in drag. So these men were wearing dresses and they were fully clothed and they were wearing masks. And in fact, New York State outlawed disguises. It was illegal to wear disguises. It was illegal to gather in more than 2 or 3 people in disguises and masks. And that law was only overturned in 2020 because we were all wearing masks. It was also a law that was used to prosecute Occupy Wall Street. So here's this uprising in drag in a farmer's field. It was essentially a rent strike. And their dream was to redistribute land, to redistribute wealth, and there would be no centralized government. It would all be communal land. So it was this very kind of anarchist vision avant la lettre. But the other thing that's wild in the back of the image that you can't see, all the lawmen are wearing corsets. So I was just very interested in this, obviously they're wearing corsets because it's the fashion of the times. But to me, because obviously we see things as we are now, I would like to imagine into it all of these men kind of bending their gender. So this was why I wanted to be here with Jon, was just so that we could compare our 2 lithographs.
When was your lithograph made? When was this created?
So this lithograph was actually made in September 1845. So there was a shootout and a corral in the town next to mine in August of 1845. And this lithograph is actually a kind of quasi-legal document. Like all the law guys signed it because the undersheriff was shot and killed. So it's like, so it says the death of Osmond Steele and it's signed by the survivors. So it was working in a certain way. And it's also the only document of what happened there.
I mean, this is amazing. I mean, this is literally proof that this happened. These people existed, who died, who survived, who won. I love this.
Yeah. And then there are the horses that get shot. And basically they're trying to auction off 6 cows. That was the deal.
The other question I had about this, I think this lithograph, like my lithograph is so focused on the figure, and your lithograph is obviously the figure and the land, and just quickly kind of, like we talked about this, quickly going through some of the writing and reviews about your book, it is so about the landscape, it is so about, these histories that have been imbued there. So, I don't know, talk about that.
Well, I mean, if you're going to be polytemporal, then land can exist in all these ways. I'm very interested in the ways there are a lot of old stone walls. Those rocks can hold time. Lichen can hold time. Trees hold time. Yeah. And that if you were in a place, you probably found as you started to do research, that research starts to vibrate into your time and sense of place and the way you move through it. So... And for me, the land was a particular thing that held time. But I will also say about where I live, it is where continents split apart originally
Right.
as what became Africa split from what is now considered North America. But it is also where the first trees on Earth emerged 380 million years ago.
Wow.
So, you know, I was like all of the time in the land. Yes. Yeah. Anything else?
Oh, five.
We've got 5 minutes.
Okay, great. I love it. I don't know. Tell us about like writing this book. How long did it take you to write it? What was the process?
It took about, well, because there are 2 linked books, it took about 10 years. And it was like a lot of weird research. I mean, you know, how long did it take you to write your book?
Like 4.5 years, so not as long.
Yeah, but it was probably sitting in your brain for longer than that.
It was, no,
Yeah.
definitely, because the very first artifact that I found, like pre the program, was this 1926 Fire magazine.
Can we talk about Fire for a second?
Let's just talk about it for 1 second. It's cool. So if you don't know Fire magazine, it was made in 1926 in Harlem by this group of artists and designers called the Niggerati that was spearheaded by Wallace Thurman and featured, you know, the greats like Langston Hughes or Neil Hurston, all these amazing people. But one of the main reasons why it's really important to me is that it was the first time in American history that a story about a Black gay like lover was published, and it was published by Richard Bruce Nugent, who was who worked at this hotel and fell in love with the pretty Latino boy that worked down the hallway, and they had a loving relationship, and it's like all based off of true stories, and so it's written in like this stream of consciousness, kind of sexy, lyrical verse. And so, yeah, and that was the very first thing of like, you know, for me, that was like finding this story 100 years ago about Black queer people. And that was kind of the exciting thing that was, sparked me to look further back and also to see what else is around.
Totally. And also to be a person where it's like, you know, you're RISD and there's no you represented
Yeah.
in the world of design, to start to find antecedents for those stories.
Absolutely, because people genuinely make you feel as if, you know, you weren't there. There is nothing that, you know, Black queer people contributed to design history. And we obviously know that's just not true. And that thing that can be said about any type of, you know, various types of intersections of identities, is that, you know, people have been making work, people have been existing, people have been crafting and telling their stories, you know, since the beginning of time.
And having a history for that is like grounding. So instead of having to be a first, one is in a lineage.
Exactly.
And that's super empowering.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think, there we go.
I think that's it.
I think that's it.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone.
And also thank you for entertaining us, letting us be here, and indulging our little conversation.
Yes,
Yeah.
thanks for listening.
Thank you, guys.
Give it up one more time for Jennifer and Jon.